Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about album number 6 from Amon Tobin, Chaos Theory. Alright, here's a bit of a strange side point in the Amon Tobin catalog. Coming off the success of his last several albums, he had gained enough notoriety to be hired for the soundtrack of a AAA video game, Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell Chaos Theory from 2005. Now, ordinarily, I wouldn't be talking about a soundtrack album like this in its own dedicated video while doing a discography review. This would be the kind of thing I'd usually say for like an odds and ends or something. Although I got a whole bunch of people in my comments who made it clear they really wanted me to not skip over this one and still talk about it in a full video anyway, so here we go. Don't worry, I did not forget about it. I do have a feeling like the notoriety of the Splinter Cell video game franchise and the fact that Chaos Theory is one of the most well-acclaimed installments in said franchise made this a particularly common starting point for people who may not have heard of Amon Tobin before getting into his work for the first time. So most likely this is going to be like a bit of a nostalgia point for certain people. Now, Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell Chaos Theory is a very well-acclaimed game from back in the day, although if you really want me to like go in depth on how great the video game is, I think you're going to be disappointed. I'll be brutally honest, my experience of the game is limited to watching about 20 minutes of a playthrough on YouTube before deciding, no, this is not my thing. Right about when I realized the beginning of the game has you playing, it was this cool American super spy from the NSA doing counter-revolutionary action in goddamn South America of all places. We're fighting the evil Peruvian terrorist revolutionaries. Immediately my mind went to, like, the US is backing a military dictatorships in Chile to combat socialism in the 70s, or the fact that the US literally started out this year kidnapping the president of Venezuela for no reason. And I was like, okay, I'm good. Get this war on terror US military propaganda out of my face, thank you. Yes, I know the South Americans aren't supposed to be, like, the main bad guys of the game. I think North Korea is? At least I think. I read, like, a plot synopsis of the game, and I would not be able to tell you what the hell is supposed to be going on in this thing. Besides, you know, the fact that part of it takes place in South America and more of it takes place in East Asia and stuff, whatever. But I still got that whiff of US imperialist interventionism is gonna solve everything, which still hit a wrong enough note for me in 2026 to just lose me immediately. Now, absolutely no one is coming to this video hoping to hear me talk about this game's depictions of geopolitics, including myself. I don't feel equipped to unpack that in any further detail anyway, and it's obviously possible that in dipping out so damn early I got the completely wrong idea about what the game was or wasn't trying to say. I did feel the need to bring it up, as it does feel a little insidious that Tobin, an artist originally from Brazil himself, was soundtracking a game where South Americans seem to be depicted as a bunch of bad guys that need to be dealt with by the United States. But I'm also not here to, like, accuse the guy of shilling for the US military, as I have a feeling that kind of implication wasn't really on the forefront of either his mind or the minds of the game's fans. I strongly suspect very few of the game's actual fans are really here for the story to begin with. That kind of military story is so ridiculously normalized in the video game world as to be pretty much meaningless, which is a whole nother can of worms I don't really want to get into. And all the crazy rave reviews Chaos Theory got at the time, at least that I read, barely even touched on the story at all. The ones that did were like, the story's not all that great, but that's not why you're here anyway. People were more concerned about like how cutting edge and advanced the graphics were at the time, all the different options for like gameplay strategies and environmental interactions, and how immersive the presentation felt and that kind of thing. It's a regular stealth shooter game from the mid-2000s, which also, to be fair, does still look and sound halfway decent by today's standards, which is saying something for a game that's over 20 years old at this point. Now, it is also possibly a little disappointing that from the small bits that I did see of the game and what I've read about it in reviews and stuff, Tobin's music doesn't actually play as much into the overall experience as you might think. If I'm not mistaken, the music from this album is primarily there for like when you're getting into like high-action shootout scenes or something. But Chaos Theory is a stealth game. You're supposed to be stealthy and not alert people to your presence. and while you're being stealthy, you're not hearing music. You're just hearing, like, environmental sounds and people talking in the background. None of the small bits of the game I watched had any music at all, except for the opening cutscenes, although from my understanding those weren't even using Tobin's music either. The cutscenes were scored by a completely different composer, Jesper Kyd, who's best known for his scores for the Hitman and Assassin's Creed franchises. Probably could have gotten to Tobin's stuff if I waited longer than 20 minutes, but hey, I guess that makes it all the easier to disconnect my feelings on Chaos Theory the album from the context of Chaos Theory the game, and treat this as if it really was a regular old main studio album of his. Now, the real reason this album got its own video, frankly, has absolutely nothing to do with the game, which I do not give a shit about. It's because being connected to the game gave Tobin an excuse to work with a AAA game studio's budget and elevate his existing sound to another new level. Finally ditching all samples altogether and instead assembling a full band made out of various South American, Latin American, and East Asian professional musicians he looked up to. This album's liner notes show Tobin, like, geeking out over some of the musicians he was able to bring in, including Nacho Mendez, a Mexican bassist and composer who, like, once did the soundtrack for some cult classic Mexican films in the 70s. There was Eiji Miyake, a flautist who was brought in despite not speaking English and still really resonated with the session anyway. And the brothers Umberto and Massimo Modugno on mellotron and Hammond organ respectively, who previously were not on speaking terms with each other but agreed to reunite this one time to help Tobin out, among several others. Those were the ones he shouted out in particular. Bringing in all these guest musicians, I suppose, lends some special authenticity inspired by the setting, and I suppose could be a way of counteracting the possibly questionable messaging of the game, I don't know. And Ubisoft was apparently so impressed with what Tobin did for this soundtrack that they went ahead and let him release this album 2 months before the game even came out. So, in more ways than one, this is one of those kinds of soundtrack albums that was pretty specifically designed to be listened to out of context. Well, at least in theory. Now, I'm probably not going to surprise anyone when I say I think Chaos Theory as an album, diverse from any further context, is pretty solid. It's basically him continuing directly off the exact same style he was exploring on Out From Out Where, and it's hard to go wrong with that kind of sound. Just as unique and one-of-a-kind blend of sounds that couldn't be mistaken for any other artist in the world. You're going to be getting equally as heavy breakbeat workouts and gritty live bass and drums and violins and stuff with various other instrumental flares for even more extra texture. It's always super dense and super dark and as tense and exciting as you'd want the soundtrack to a spy video game to be. Though, at the same time, this ain't exactly on Out From Out Where's level either. If I didn't know any better, I'd feel like this was a collection of B-sides and sketches that didn't make the cut for that album. Chaos Theory is obviously not the result of Tobin, like, handing over a regular album he made on his own time to Ubisoft to do what they will with it. At the end of the day, it is still a commissioned soundtrack album, and it comes with some of the usual issues that I have with standalone soundtrack albums. Most notably, the much more background music-y nature of these compositions that lack the kind of striking hooks of his previous work, while also not going as strikingly far with its sound design as the 2 albums he would put out after this. I probably listened to this album at least like 10 times over the past 2 weeks, and while in one breath I never got sick of it, or felt it wearing out on me, all the more helped by its especially tight and breezy 48-minute length. It's the kind of thing that just zips by super quick. But nearly every listen I gave this thing ran together in like a single indistinct blur and disappeared from my memory like the instant it was over. It's the kind of thing that's always impressive when I pay attention to it, but it's also not entirely designed to be paid close attention to either. And I'd be lying if I said this, like, really sat among Tobin's best work ever. Now, is there still good stuff here? Of course. Like I said, material that feels like it could be leftovers from Out Where is still following after the template of an absolutely incredible album. For some highlights of note, in the category of the album's heaviest and most propulsive bangers, you obviously got something like Ruthless, which just hits you over the head with tons of layers of crazy crashing live drums and dissonant chiming melodies. The reprise of this track later on let some of the marginally more melodic and atmospheric elements take greater focus. But you also got something like El Cargo, which combines some decently solid melodic guitar riffs with some thicker live breakbeat chops, as well as some chilling choirs in the background, or some piano and string breakdowns. That one particularly starts going even harder in the second half, and it's in the running for best track here. And of course, we can't forget the album's epic 7-minute closer, The Cleanup, which really goes for broke and tries to combine like all the different kinds of instrumental players you've been getting throughout the album together all at once. Tense dark ambience, organic hand percussion, driving bass, and more banging live drums that get bigger and heavier over time, as well as some big orchestral sections with screechingly dissonant string progressions. Definitely a climactic way to go out. And the album has its solid share of lower key moments that hit for what they're going for as well. I think my favorite track here might be Theme from Battery, which really leans into the strings and woodwinds for this swirling and dark, jazzy orchestral ambient-ish piece. Though speaking of jazzier moments, I also quite like the off-kilter but chill drumming, eerie strings, and foreboding vocal manipulations that show up through Kokubo Sosho Stealth. And while we're at it, Hokkaido is also nice, as technically the album's most peaceful moment, if you want to call it that. It is still extremely dark and foreboding in tone, but the track is also like almost entirely ambient, built around melancholic cello performances with maybe a few little light percussion textures that might have a very slight drum and bass flavor to them or something. So all of that is really nice, though there are also tracks here and there that, while they keep up the same sort of vibe as everything else here, don't stand out as much to me. Like the opening track, The Lighthouse. It certainly lets you know what you're going to be getting into with some pretty chunky bass riffs and neat progressions, though I wouldn't say its particular execution of these ideas are among the most memorable on the album. If it weren't literally the first track on the album, this could be the kind of thing that would like blend into its surroundings really easily. Yeah, I know it's a spy game, so I suppose some of this stuff blending into the surroundings is to be expected, but still less beneficial to an album experience in my opinion. And on that topic, I guess the 6-minute not really centerpiece Displaced provides Tobin with an excuse to go more abstract and not really give as much thought to overall structure. Again, starting out tense and quieter with some off-kilter guitar riffs and building up a big crescendo, though the crashing blends of drums that come later just kind of wash over me, and I often don't even realize that I'm in a different track from the surrounding moments. And this effect is even more of an issue for me on Kokubo Sosho Battle, a track which is in fact an actual B-side that didn't make the cut for Out From Out Where. Originally this track was called Cougar Merkin, and it was included alongside the standalone single version of Verbal, and it was purely an excuse to just like mash together a bunch of unhinged breakbeat workouts with little rhyme or reason to their assembly aside from, you know, going hard. This new adaptation of that track adds in some cool orchestral textures, like horns and stuff in the mix, and like even further amps up the bass. It is better than the original, but once again, the experience just kind of goes in one ear and out the other for me, seeing as most of the album is already filled to the brim with unhinged breakbeat workouts. It's just kind of a track that's there in context. As a side note, no, I have not heard the 5.1 surround version of this album, as I do not own a 5.1 surround system, nor do I have the budget or space to invest in one. Please leave me alone, audiophiles. Although that version of the album also comes with one more extra track called Stolen, which I did look up on YouTube, and that was generally neat, I guess. Some cool dark ambience with bass and wailing vocal manipulations in the background, and yeah, it's a thing that exists. But yeah, that is pretty much everything I have to note on Chaos Theory. I can't provide you commentary on how well this material works in the context of the game, but as a standalone album, I think it's quite solid, if also nothing that got absolutely knocked out of the park. Feels like it could be like kind of a transitional moment for him where he was starting to get even more ambitious with his sound design and put even more of his focus in that department. Although that transition at this point was only going so far as, like, you know, all the instrumentation having originally been played live, and he was moving away from piecing together these elements to form more memorable hooks. It's kind of like an awkward, half-formed point in his catalog that has neither the same appeal for me as his earlier stuff or his later stuff. It marks an important development for his sound, for sure, and if you are a fan of his on whatever level, it's not going to be the kind of thing you'd want to skip out on altogether. And I did have a fun time with the material that was here. I still definitely had more fun with this than I did with, say, Bricolage. But I just don't find it to be among the most mind-blowing stuff in his overall repertoire. It's a good album, but not a great one for me, so I'm overall feeling like a 7.3 out of 10 on it. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.